What if I told you there are towns in America where you can retire on Social Security, live mostly off-grid, and pay less in monthly expenses than most people spend on streaming services and coffee subscriptions combined? Not theoretical towns, not fantasy communes where everyone wears hemp and argues about moon phases. Real towns with post offices, dollar stores, and people who've quietly figured out how to live on $500 a month without feeling like they're losing. These aren't the places real estate investors talk about. They're not on anyone's top 10 retirement destinations list. They don't have golf courses, luxury condos, or waterfront views that cost more than your entire working life. What they do have is space, silence, low expectations, and a surrounding rural landscape where living off-grid isn't a rebellion. It's just how some people prefer to handle electricity, water, and the general chaos of modern dependency. And the wildest part? Social Security actually works here, not as a supplement to your other income, not as a safety net you're embarrassed to mention, as your actual functional income. The kind that covers your land payment, your propane, your property taxes, and leaves enough left over for groceries that don't come in vacuum-sealed apocalypse buckets. So, before the algorithm decides this video is too useful to recommend, and before someone realizes these loopholes still exist, hit that like button. Not because I need the validation. I'm held together by duct tape and spite at this point, but because every time you do, a financial advisor somewhere has to recalculate their entire retirement seminar. And honestly, that feels like community service. All right, let's talk about the 10 towns where Social Security, retirement, and off-grid living quietly coexist like two neighbors who wave but never ask questions. Truth or Consequences sits in southern New Mexico, like a town that accidentally wandered off the map and decided staying lost was easier than going back. Named after a 1950s radio show and a publicity stunt that somehow stuck, this place has the energy of a location that stopped trying to impress people decades ago and now just exists. In comfortable, sun-baked defiance of modern expectations. The town itself is small. Hot springs bubble up through the ground like the earth is trying to start a spa but gave up halfway through the permit process. RVs park for months, retirees soak in mineral water, art galleries exist for reasons nobody can fully explain. It's weird, but it's the kind of weird that minds its own business. And just outside town limits, across Sierra County, the off-grid reality becomes visible. Small parcels of land, solar panels tilted toward a sky so blue it looks photoshopped. Trailers, tiny homes, cabins built by people who watched too many YouTube tutorials and not enough OSHA videos. Wells, septic systems, propane tanks sitting beside homes like loyal pets. This isn't hardcore survival off-grid. It's practical off-grid. The kind where you still drive into town for groceries, but your electric bill is zero because your roof generates your power, and your well pump runs on sunshine and stubbornness. Social Security income here doesn't feel stretched. It feels functional. Land is cheap enough that people buy outright or finance on terms so relaxed they border on theoretical. Property taxes are low enough to make you check the bill twice thinking they forgot a zero. And the cost of living drops so dramatically once you stop paying utility companies that your monthly budget starts feeling like a typo from a more generous timeline. Of course, New Mexico heat is not subtle. Summer here is aggressive. The sun doesn't warm you, it interrogates you. And isolation is real. Your nearest neighbor might be far enough away that smoke signals would be more reliable than Wi-Fi. But for people who came here specifically to stop being accessible, that's not a bug, it's the feature. Truth or Consequences teaches you something important about retirement. You don't need a beachfront condo to live well. You need a place where your dollars stretch, your independence is respected, and nobody cares if your house runs on batteries and rainwater as long as it doesn't fall over. Mountain View, Arkansas is what happens when the Ozark Mountains get tired of being dramatic and decide to just be quietly, beautifully weird instead. This town sits in Stone County, surrounded by forested hills, winding roads, and the kind of landscape that looks like it was painted by someone who only owns green crayons. It's the self-proclaimed folk music capital of the world, which is both charming and slightly concerning, depending on how you feel about banjos. But past the town square, past the craft shops and the weekend tourists pretending to understand dulcimers, The real story unfolds across the surrounding county. Land here is affordable in a way that makes coastal retirees weep. Small parcels, timber, streams that actually have water in them, and a deep, unspoken culture of people who built their own homes, drilled their own wells, and haven't paid an electric bill since the Clinton administration. Off-grid here doesn't look like a statement. It looks like a cabin at the end of a gravel road. Solar panels half hidden under oak branches. A wood stove that handles winter. A garden that handles summer. Chickens that handle entertainment and occasionally breakfast. Social Security income works because the math is simple. Buy land outright for what a used car costs in California. Build small, build smart. Pay property taxes that feel like a suggested donation. Heat with wood you cut yourself, or buy from a neighbor who needs the work. Suddenly, $400 a month isn't poverty. It's a functional life with savings left over. The people here don't talk about off-grid like it's a philosophy. They talk about it like plumbing. It's just how things are set up. You handle your own power, your own water, your own waste, and in return, the systems that normally extract monthly fees from your existence quietly leave you alone. Of course, Arkansas has personality. The humidity can feel like being hugged by a warm, invisible jellyfish. The roads sometimes look like they were paved during the Eisenhower administration and haven't been touched since. And if you need a hospital, you'll want to plan ahead and maybe bring snacks. But Mountain View offers something rare in American retirement, a place where Social Security isn't a supplement. It's enough. Enough to own your home. Enough to control your own infrastructure. Enough to live without the constant financial pressure that makes retirement feel like a very slow panic attack with scenic views. Iron, Missouri is the kind of town that makes you wonder if someone lost a bet with geography and decided to just build a courthouse anyway. This is the Iron County seat, tucked into the southeastern Missouri hills like a footnote someone forgot to delete. The population hovers around 1,400 people, which is large enough to have a Dollar General, and small enough that everyone knows when you buy toilet paper in bulk and draws their own conclusions. But Iron isn't the destination, it's the anchor. The place you list on mail forms, the place you drive to when you need a building permit. Or more accurately, when you realize the county doesn't actually enforce much outside town limits, and you probably didn't need to drive in at all. The real story is in the surrounding land. Iron County, old timberland, old mining land, land that was useful once and now sits quietly waiting for someone who wants space more than they want municipal services. This is deep, rural Missouri, not the wine country Missouri tourists pretend exists. The Missouri where roads turn to gravel, then dirt, then suggestions, where off-grid isn't a lifestyle brand. It's what happens when the power company decides your driveway is too long to justify the cost of running a line. People here live in cabins, manufactured homes, converted barns, and structures best described as ambitious. Solar setups, wells, septic systems installed by someone's cousin who swears he knows what he's doing. Wood stoves, propane, rain barrels, the full off-grid starter pack. And Social Security income works because nobody here is trying to impress anyone. You're not competing with vacation homes or Airbnb investors. You're competing with deer. And the deer aren't making cash offers. Land prices are so low they feel like clerical errors. Property taxes are low enough that you could almost forget to pay them. Though you shouldn't because even Missouri has standards. And the cost of living drops so far once you remove monthly utility bills that retirement starts feeling less like managed decline and more like a life you can actually afford to live. Of course, this is Missouri. Weather here has opinions. Summer is hot and sticky. Winter shows up with confidence. Spring brings storms that look like they're auditioning for a disaster movie. And if you need specialized medical care, St. Louis is a drive that requires mental preparation. But Iron teaches you the same lesson as the other towns on this list. Retirement doesn't require luxury. It requires math that works. And when your housing is paid off, your power is free, and your taxes are low, the math works on Social Security alone. Welch, West Virginia, sits in McDowell County like a town that survived the apocalypse and decided not to mention it to anyone. This was coal country. Emphasis on was. When the mines closed, the economy didn't just slow down. It collapsed, packed its bags, and moved to a state with better infrastructure. What's left is a place where survival looks different, quieter, harder, and weirdly more affordable than almost anywhere else in America. The population of Welch has dropped so dramatically that the welcome sign feels optimistic. Buildings sit empty. Streets are wide because nobody uses them. The county itself has one of the lowest median incomes in the entire country, which sounds grim until you realize it also has some of the lowest costs of living. And just outside town, across the hills and hollows, people live off-grid, not because it's trendy, but because it's practical. Old family land, trailers on foundations, cabins built from reclaimed lumber and determination, wells drilled by hand, solar panels bolted to roofs that have seen better decades. This isn't Instagram off-grid. This is Appalachian off-grid. The kind where you heat with coal or wood because that's what's available. The kind where neighbors help each other because the nearest Home Depot is an expedition. The kind where Social Security income is often the most stable money in the entire community. Land here is almost free. Not metaphorically, literally. Parcels sell for thousands of dollars, sometimes less. Property taxes are negligible and the cost of living is so low that retirees from other states move here and feel like they've discovered a glitch in the economic system. Of course, McDowell County isn't easy. The infrastructure is rough. Jobs are scarce. Medical care requires travel. The region carries decades of economic trauma that doesn't just disappear because housing is cheap. But for retirees who want space, silence, and the ability to live on Social Security without feeling like they're failing, Welch offers something important. A place where your income isn't judged, where land is accessible, where off-grid living is so normalized that nobody calls it that. They just call it home. Altus, Oklahoma sits on the flat southwestern plains like a town that looked at the horizon and said, "Yeah, that's far enough. This is cotton country, wheat country, wind country." The kind of place where the sky takes up most of the view and the land stretches so flat, you start wondering if someone forgot to add terrain. Altus itself is a small city around 18,000 people, which makes it the largest anchor point on this list, but it's not the town that matters. It's the surrounding countryside. Jackson County, rural Oklahoma. Land so open and affordable that retirees quietly buy parcels, drop a manufactured home, or build a small cabin, and live on budgets that would get laughed out of a coastal coffee shop. Off-grid here is less about ideology and more about practicality. You're far enough from infrastructure that running utilities costs more than just handling it yourself. Solar panels work beautifully under a sky with zero shade and approximately 300 days of sunshine. Wells are common. Septic systems are standard. Propane handles heating and cooking. Social Security income works because everything is cheap. Land, taxes, propane, groceries, the general cost of existing. People retire here not because it's glamorous, but because the math makes sense in a way it doesn't anywhere near a coast. Of course, Oklahoma weather is a full-time job. Tornadoes are not theoretical. Summer heat could melt your dignity. Winter occasionally remembers it's supposed to be cold and overdo it. And the wind, dear God, the wind is a permanent presence that will rearrange your outdoor furniture, your plans, and occasionally your belief system. But Altus teaches you that retirement doesn't need to be complicated. It needs to be affordable. And when your housing is paid for, your utilities are self-generated, and your taxes are low, Social Security stops feeling like survival and starts feeling like income. Alamosa, Colorado sits in the San Luis Valley, like someone dropped a town into the bottom of a giant bowl and forgot to add water. This is high desert, 7,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by mountains that look painted. The air is so thin, your first week feels like cardio conditioning. The skies are so clear at night, you can see galaxies and start questioning your life choices. The town itself is functional. College town, farming hub, quiet. But the real opportunity is outside city limits, across the valley floor. Land here is strangely affordable for Colorado. Not Denver affordable, but actually affordable. Parcels large enough to build on, far enough from neighbors to avoid judgment, and legally loose enough that off-grid living is quietly common. Solar power works beautifully at this altitude. The sun doesn't just shine, it commits. Wells tap into aquifers. Septic systems are standard. Propane heats homes that need heating approximately 9 months a year because Colorado winter is not a suggestion. Social Security income works here because the cost of living is reasonable. Not Boulder reasonable, not Aspen reasonable. Actually reasonable. You can own land, control your infrastructure, and still afford to eat food that didn't come from a Mylar pouch labeled tactical nutrition. Of course, Alamosa comes with disclaimers. The altitude affects people. Some adapt. Some spend their first month wondering why stairs feel like cardio. Winter is cold, not movie cold, Colorado cold. The kind that makes you respect propane and question your roof insulation. But for retirees who want mountain views, clean air, and the ability to live off-grid without living in a bunker, the San Luis Valley offers something rare. Space, silence, and a place where Social Security income can actually fund a life instead of just delaying the inevitable. Globe, Arizona is what happens when a mining town survives long enough to become charming by accident. This is Gila County, southeastern Arizona. Mountains, canyons, desert that transitions into pine forests if you drive long enough in any direction that isn't down. Globe itself is quirky. Historic buildings, local diners, streets that look like they were designed by someone who thought grids were oppressive. But past the town limits, across the county, the landscape opens into exactly the kind of rugged, affordable land that makes off-grid retirement possible. This is Arizona, so solar power is essentially mandatory by geography. The sun here doesn't just rise, it dominates. Wells are common, septic systems are normal, and the zoning is loose enough that people build cabins, place manufactured homes, or construct dome houses without anyone scheduling a hearing about community aesthetics. Social Security works here because housing is cheap and utilities are optional. Land sells for prices that make sense. Property taxes stay low. And once you remove monthly bills for power, water, and sewer, your budget suddenly has room to breathe. Of course, Arizona heat is not subtle. Summer here could cook an egg on your hood, your driveway, and possibly your forehead. Monsoon season brings dramatic storms. And if you need serious medical care, Phoenix is a drive that requires planning and possibly snacks. But Globe teaches the same lesson as the others. Retirement doesn't require beachfront property. It requires land you can afford, infrastructure you can control, and a community that doesn't care how you generate electricity as long as you're not bothering anyone. But Montana sits in the northern Rockies like a town that survived a century of boom and bust and decided stubbornness was a viable economic strategy. This was copper country, the richest hill on Earth, they called it. Now it's a town surrounded by old mines, big views, and land that's affordable because nobody's competing for it except elk and people who think winter builds character. The town itself has infrastructure, history, and a population that's seen everything and is no longer impressed. But outside the city limits, across Silver Bow County and beyond, the rural landscape offers exactly what off-grid retirees need. Space, cheap land, a culture that respects self-sufficiency because that's how people survived here for generations. Off-grid in Montana is serious business. Solar works, but winter tests it. Wells freeze if you're not careful. Heating requires wood, propane, or both. This is not soft off-grid. This is Montana off-grid, where you respect the weather or the weather reminds you why you should. Social Security works here because land is cheap and property taxes are low. You can buy a parcel outright, build small, insulate well, and live on an income that wouldn't cover rent in a coastal city. Of course, Montana winter is not a season. It's a test. A long, cold test that makes you appreciate propane, insulation, and the concept of spring. But for retirees who can handle cold and silence, Montana offers something powerful. A place where off-grid living is respected, land is accessible, and Social Security can fund a life that feels surprisingly free. Baker City, Oregon, sits in the northeastern corner of the state, like a town that decided it didn't need to compete with Portland, and is perfectly fine with that decision. This is high desert, mountains, ranch land, open sky, the kind of place where the landscape does most of the talking and the people just nod occasionally in agreement. Baker City itself is small, functional, and historically charming in the way frontier towns sometimes are when they survive long enough to become nostalgic instead of desperate. But the real opportunity is in Baker County, where land is affordable, zoning is relaxed, and off-grid living is common enough that nobody calls it a movement. Solar works here. Wells are standard. Septic systems are normal. And the rural culture respects self-sufficiency the way some places respect lawn care. Social Security income works because the cost of living is low and the barriers to ownership are minimal. You can buy land, build, or place a home and live on a budget that feels impossible anywhere west of the Cascades. Of course, Oregon winter shows up. It's cold, but not Montana cold. Remote, but not Alaska remote. And if you need specialized services, you'll drive to Boise or beyond. But Baker City offers what all these towns offer, a place where Social Security isn't just survival income. It's enough. Enough to own land. Enough to control your infrastructure. Enough to retire without financial panic. Hancock, Michigan, sits on the Keweenaw Peninsula in the Upper Peninsula like a town that watched the rest of America modernize and politely declined. This is copper country, snow country, Lake Superior country, the kind of place where winter lasts longer than most people's attention spans, and locals measure snowfall in feet, the way other places measure rainfall in inches. Hancock itself is small, cold, and very Finnish. You'll see saunas, pasties, and a cultural stubbornness that treats winter like a personality trait. But outside town, across Houghton County, the land offers exactly what off-grid retirees need. Space, affordability, and a culture that respects people who handle their own infrastructure because that's how half the county already lives. Solar works here, but winter tests it. Wells work, but need to be protected from freezing. Heating is serious business. Wood, propane, or both. This is not casual off-grid. This is Michigan winter off-grid, where preparation isn't optional. Social Security works here because land is cheap, taxes are low, and the cost of living is minimal. You can own outright, build small, insulate heavily, and live on an income that wouldn't cover rent elsewhere. Of course, Michigan winter is long, very long. If you don't like snow, cold, or darkness, Hancock will break you gently but firmly. But for retirees who can handle winter and value silence, Hancock offers something rare. A place where Social Security can fund a life that's not just affordable, it's genuinely independent. So here we are, 10 towns, 10 very different landscapes, 10 places where Social Security income can actually fund off-grid or semi-off-grid retirement without requiring trust funds, side hustles, or a YouTube channel about living in a van. These aren't utopias. They're not perfect. They're remote, sometimes harsh, occasionally inconvenient, and culturally specific in ways that won't appeal to everyone. But they offer something increasingly rare in modern America, a place where the math works, where land is accessible, where independence is respected, and where retirement doesn't mean managed decline in an expensive apartment eating ramen and pretending it's a choice. These towns prove that escape doesn't require leaving the country. It requires leaving the parts of the country that stopped making sense. The parts where housing eats half your income, where utilities cost more than food, where independence is treated like a permit violation. Out here in these forgotten corners, Social Security isn't poverty. It's enough. Enough to own land, enough to build small, enough to live quietly without constant financial pressure.